On March 9th, Japan's first launchers equipped with domestically made long-range missiles entered the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force base. This move is in response to the increasing security challenges posed by China. On March 9th, the launchers and other equipment were shipped from the Shizuoka-based testing unit. And on the night of March 8th, they were unloaded at the Shinmoji port in Kitakyushu City. They were then transported to the Kangun base in Kumamoto Prefecture. The Chief Cabinet Secretary of Japan, Minoru Hikara, stated that the upgraded Type 12 surface-to-ship missiles would be deployed at the Kangun base by the end of March. However, he did not provide further details. Originally scheduled for deployment in 2027, this was accelerated due to the changing security environment. Later this year, the missiles will also be stationed at the Fuji base in Shizuoka Prefecture, located west of Tokyo. Developed and manufactured by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, this upgraded Type 12 missile has a significantly extended range, from 200 kilometers to about 1,000 kilometers. From Kumamoto, its range can cover the Chinese coastal areas of Zhejiang, Jiangsu, Shanghai, and Shandong, as well as most of North Korea. Shanghai, one of China's most important economic centers, is also the country's largest city. The upgraded Type 12 missile features a stealthy design and high mobility, reducing the likelihood of interception. As China continues to increase its military pressure around Taiwan, Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines view China's actions as a serious security threat and are actively strengthening their military forces. Japan is accelerating its defense force development, including establishing missile bases and mass-producing missiles to counter the threat from China. The Japanese government says that the missile deployment is meant to improve Japan's counter-strike capability against China and North Korea's military expansion. Once an enemy is deemed ready to launch an attack, Japan will be able to counteract before the strike happens. Currently, Japan has deployed Patriot PAC-3 anti-aircraft missiles and medium-range surface-to-air missiles on several islands, including Okinawa, Ishigaki, and Miyako. Japan's current defense minister, Shinjiro Koizumi, announced in February this year that by March 2031, medium-range surface-to-air missiles will be deployed on Yonaguni Island, the westernmost island of Japan, close to Taiwan's eastern coast. Since taking office, Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi has stated that any military action by China against Taiwan would threaten Japan's security and economy, and therefore Japan must respond militarily. This stance is seen as a continuation of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's strategy. Takaichi has promised to revise Japan's national security and defense policies by the end of 2026, and to further strengthen military power through drones and long-range missiles. Recently, Japan has made a series of significant moves. On March 13th, Japan's defense minister, Shinjiro Koizumi, announced that the U.S. Tomahawk cruise missiles and Norway-made Joint Strike missiles have begun to be delivered to Japan. This marks Japan's first official receipt of foreign-made long-range weapons, also known as standoff missiles. Koizumi stated, "Our defense capabilities will only be used when the country is subjected to armed attacks." China, clearly frustrated, claimed that the old path of militarization and war will lead to self-destruction. Netizens remarked that this statement would be better directed at China. Additionally, Japan is seriously considering and planning to join the Iron Dome missile defense system proposed by the Trump administration, primarily to counter the hypersonic missile threats posed by China and Russia. Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi is expected to convey Japan's willingness to join the Iron Dome initiative during her meeting with President Trump on March 19th. This will be her first official visit to the U.S. since taking office as Prime Minister. The Iron Dome system is a next-generation missile defense concept proposed by the Trump administration last year. The goal is to protect the U.S. mainland from aerial threats such as ballistic missiles, hypersonic weapons, and drones by deploying interceptors, sensors, and satellite networks in space. The system is planned to begin deployment as early as January 2029. The U.S.-Japan cooperation will focus on the joint development of new intercept missiles targeting hypersonic threats, planned to be completed in the 2030s, and the construction of a satellite network for detection and tracking. Japan hopes the system will also enhance and expand its own domestic defense capabilities. Many analysts believe that the enhanced deployment of long-range missiles marks a significant step for Japan, moving from the principle of exclusive defense to gaining counter-strike capability. Chinese commentator Nomadic Kunlun analyzes that Japan's past adherence to the exclusive defense principle, which only allowed for minimal defense after an attack, is now evolving. The deployment of long-range missiles means Japan now possesses the ability to attack enemy bases. Strategically, the Kumamoto base can influence important passageways for Chinese fleets entering and leaving the Pacific, strengthening the defense of the southwestern islands, and have a potential impact on the Taiwan Strait situation. Nomadic Kunlun analyzes that Japan's large-scale shift in military policy could trigger a chain reaction in East Asian arms policies. If countries like North Korea, which are military powerhouses, also lift restrictions, the security landscape in East Asia and globally may be reshaped. South Korean scholar Lee Seong-hyun, who has long focused on Northeast Asian geopolitics, told New Tang Dynasty that Japan has added a new type of land-based long-range strike force in the East China Sea direction. This means that if China aims to seize control of the East China Sea and its surrounding waters, it will face more resistance. Additionally, China's main naval opponent in the East China Sea will no longer only be Japan's maritime self-defense force ships or the Japanese Air Force, but also Japan's land-based anti-ship missile strike force. Moreover, since this anti-ship missile system has extensive range, it theoretically could also threaten Chinese naval ships stationed at China's naval bases in wartime. Taiwanese security researcher Su Ziyun pointed out that this move by Japan will also impact China's strategic calculations. In the event of a conflict in northern Taiwan, if China targets Japan, Japan will have a high chance of assisting in the defense of Taiwan's eastern side. Japan would use long-range anti-ship missiles or surface-to-surface missiles to support Taiwan in combat. After Japan announced the deployment of its latest missiles, some internet users remarked, "Did you notice? Modern warfare really has little to do with ordinary people. Only leaders can enjoy long-range precision strikes. A missile worth millions of dollars is only available to those with power and wealth. Ordinary people can't even enter the areas targeted by missile strikes, which are usually restricted, with heavy security, and not easily accessible to the common people." Some netizens said that if a war breaks out, Japan's long-range missiles could reach Beijing's government complexes in Zhongnanhai and carry out a precise decapitation strike on Chinese leaders like Xi Jinping. On February 28 this year, the U.S. and Israel launched a joint large-scale airstrike, successfully killing Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, along with several of his key associates and senior generals. Multiple reports confirmed that Israel's F-15s, which air-launched the Blue Sparrow ballistic missiles, played the main role in the decapitation of Khamenei. Originally designed as targets for the Arrow missile defense system, these missiles were later converted into offensive hypersonic, quasi-ballistic precision strike weapons. Military commentator Shurika stated that Japan's plan to deploy long-range missiles in Kumamoto Prefecture, Kyushu, primarily refers to the Type 12 SSM extended-range anti-ship missile, which has an official range of about 1,000 kilometers. The distance from Kumamoto to Shanghai is approximately 800 to 900 kilometers, and to Beijing about 1,800 to 2,100 kilometers. Therefore, Japan's long-range missiles cannot yet reach Beijing. However, Japan is developing longer-range missiles, such as hypersonic glide missiles, with target ranges of 2,000 to 3,000 kilometers. Japan's hypersonic missile development is currently advancing rapidly, with the hypervelocity gliding projectile HVGP being the core project. This is Japan's first domestically developed operational hypersonic weapon system. The initial version, the HVGP Block 1, has a range of about 500 to 900 kilometers. On March 10, 2026, the Japanese Minister of Defense officially announced that the HGVP Block 1 will complete its initial development at Camp Fuji by March 31st. The target for this deployment is the Japan Ground Defense Forces Artillery Training Unit. This marks Japan's first deployment of a hypersonic glide projectile system domestically, alongside the deployment of the upgraded Type 12 missiles in Kumamoto, signaling the practical beginning of a counterstrike capability framework. The current Block 1 is still a medium to short-range missile, with a true long-range variant capable of reaching 3,000 kilometers expected after 2030. Compared to China, the US, and Russia, Japan is still in the catch-up phase, but its progress has exceeded expectation. Japan has a complete industrial system and about 5 million highly skilled workers, allowing it to manufacture missiles, ships, fighter jets, tanks, as well as advanced hypersonic missiles, stealth anti-ship missiles, helicopter carriers, and laser weapons. Its military industrial potential is widely recognized as one of the best in the world. Japan's defense industry is mostly composed of a few manufacturers and tech conglomerates that focus on other businesses, unlike the large contractors in the UK and US that are focused solely on defense. Japan's companies face several challenges in developing the defense industry, including a lack of international support, the fact that some companies are unwilling to shift investment from other large business sectors into defense, and the lingering negative impression of Japan's military-industrial period during World War II. However, with the appointment of Sanae Takaichi as prime minister, there's optimism about Japan's potential in the defense industry. To boost Japan's defense industry and deepen security cooperation with allied nations, the ruling Liberal Democratic Party and its coalition partners have recently proposed a bill to lift the lethal weapons export restrictions, allowing the export of aircraft, missiles, artillery, tanks, armored vehicles, radar systems, air defense systems, and electronic warfare systems. They also plan to send high-level delegations to Europe, the US, and the Middle East to promote Japanese weapons. The Japanese government is supporting the growth of weapons manufacturers. Currently, Japan's 5 largest defense companies account for less than 2% of global defense exports, but with new orders expected, their stock prices surged in 2025. Japan's growing military capabilities are closely tied to the strengthening of the US-Japan alliance. During U.S. President Donald Trump's visit to Japan in October last year, Trump called on American allies to allocate 5% of their GDP to defense. The Japanese government initially planned to increase defense spending to 2% of GDP by the 2027 fiscal year. However, after Sanae Takaichi became prime minister, the Japanese cabinet approved a supplementary budget for 2025 in November, which included an additional 1.1 trillion yen, about $7 billion for defense spending. This raised the total defense spending for the fiscal year to approximately 2% of GDP. Takaichi also instructed that the 3 national security strategy documents from 2022 be revised by the end of 2026, which could potentially lead to further increases in defense spending. The new Japanese government is eager to enhance military capabilities, closely tied to the rising threat of China's expansion. Although Japan and China severed ties in 2021, relations began to stabilize by mid-2025. On October 31st, Xi Jinping held an off-site meeting with Japan's prime minister at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. But just a week later, Takaichi, in a parliamentary session, stated that according to the government's existing views, any Chinese use of force against Taiwan would be considered a national crisis situation that would allow Japan's self-defense forces to exercise collective self-defense rights. This concept is known as the Taiwan contingency theory. Seizing the opportunity, China escalated tensions, and Sino-Japanese relations worsened. China launched a full-scale diplomatic, economic, and propaganda battle, while also using military threats, with aggressive military exercises continuing without pause. From November 17th through 19th, 2025, the Chinese military conducted live fire drills in the central Yellow Sea. On December 6, Chinese J-15 jets intermittently locked onto Japan's F-15 fighter jets' fire control radar, a military indication that an attack could be imminent. On December 9th, China and Russia conducted their 10th Joint Aerial Strategic Patrol, which for the first time covered areas outside Japan's 4 main islands. Japan's Asahi TV revealed that the Liaoning carrier group came within about 400 meters of Japan's Kyushu Island. From December 29th to 31st, 2025, China held military exercises involving the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Rocket Force around Taiwan, also aimed at deterring Japan. In 2026, multiple confirmed Chinese military activities directly or indirectly targeting Japan have been reported. From January 10th to 30th, 2026, China's military carried out operations in the Bohai Sea and Northern Yellow Sea for 20 consecutive days, including live-fire drills and naval formation training. The Chinese Ministry of Defense and military media emphasized countering provocations from external forces, indirectly targeting the US-Japan alliance. In January 2026, China's Northern Theater Command Naval Submarine Unit conducted combat drills in designated areas of the Yellow Sea. Around February 2026, China maintained continuous patrols and naval activities in the East China Sea and Yellow Sea. Chinese expert Yue Wanghe believes that most of China's pressure tactics are tactical in nature, but China has a strategic aim: to test Japan's resolve to intervene militarily in the Taiwan Strait conflict. China itself is known to be a bully to the weak and afraid of the strong. If Japan responds firmly, the possibility of a quasi-Cold War or regional Cold War may actually be less likely. However, if Japan is weak and compromises, China may seize the opportunity to exploit Japan's vulnerabilities and keep applying pressure. As long as China has not made a final decision on the military unification of Taiwan, it is unlikely to have a strategic rupture with Japan. On the other hand, if China truly breaks off with Japan strategically, then the outbreak of the Taiwan War will be imminent. Sanae Takaichi was elected president of Japan's Liberal Democratic Party on October 4th last year, and became Japan's 104th prime minister on October 21st. On January 23rd this year, Takaichi dissolved the House of Representatives. On February 8th, the Japanese House of Representatives was re-elected, with the ruling Liberal Democratic Party winning overwhelmingly. This will make Takaichi's governance smoother. In contrast, during the House of Representative election, pro-China factions suffered a crushing defeat, which greatly displeased China. China's Foreign Ministry of Foreign Affairs called on Takaichi to retract her comments about Taiwan, and warned that if she acts recklessly, she would not only be repudiated by the Japanese people, but also abandoned by the international community. In response, Japan's prominent political commentator Akio Yaita wrote on Facebook that although the Chinese spokesperson claimed that Japan's election was an internal affair, they then turned around and demanded that Takaichi retract her comments about Taiwan. Isn't this contradictory? Yaita pointed out that Takaichi had clearly expressed support for Taiwan before the election and still won by an overwhelming margin, showing that this was the choice of the Japanese people. The election reflected a trend in Japanese society, where people are increasingly focused on security and defense issues. The public support for Takaichi is essentially a response to the threat posed by China. Before the election, China had attempted to pressure Japan by restricting rare earth exports, but within a few days, it quickly withdrew the measure. Yaita stated that this showed China no longer had many effective levers of threat. In contrast, Japan's foreign policy is becoming increasingly independent, especially after the election. At the Munich Security Conference on February 14th, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi criticized Takaichi's comments about the Taiwan contingency. He also accused Japan of the so-called revival of militarism. However, Japan's foreign minister refuted these remarks, stating that Wang Yi's claims lacked factual basis and that Japan's contributions to international peace and stability were well recognized. The South China Morning Post reported that in a rare move, gathered Southeast Asian diplomats in Beijing at the end of last year to call for a joint anti-Japan stance. However, this approach had little effect, with only Myanmar openly condemning Takaichi's remarks. In contrast, on November 19, 2025, Singapore's Prime Minister publicly urged China at the Bloomberg New Economy Forum to put down the hatred toward Japan. He emphasized that Japan is the most trusted major power in Southeast Asia. Chinese expert Yue Shan believes that human calculations are no match for fate. The Chinese Communist Party did not anticipate that Japan would have a government led by Takaichi, which takes a firm stance against China. Japan is still viewed by many countries around the world as a friendly and non-threatening nation, which threatens China's anti-Japan stance. If Japan grows stronger and remains friendly towards Taiwan, it will serve as a close deterrent to China's potential military action against Taiwan. Yue Shan also points out that what China doesn't foresee is that Japan's powerful ally, the United States, has already dealt with China's smaller allies, such as Venezuela, Cuba, and Iran. Xi Jinping's internal purges have weakened the Chinese military, so despite Japan's growing national and military strength, China is essentially helpless in the face of it.